Well, hello, Everybody Church. Thank you for tuning in this week. I am so excited. I can't stand it. One of the most influential ministers in the United States is kind of unknown to many, but his influence is far-reaching, and his name is Randy Eddy-McCain, and he is actually in the chair right here beside me. He's wearing his shorts. Let me tell you why. Yeah. He just flew in.
And boy, are my arms tired.
He just got here from Arkansas, flew in on Delta. We're getting ready to go to Wild Goose, but he is sitting down. I think he had an hour's sleep last night. I'm so happy that you're willing to do this. I want to hear your story from you, and I want Everybody Church to get to know this man. And Randy Eddy-McCain, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ray. I've looked forward to getting to spend some time with you. We got to meet at Little Rock when you came to visit Gary, my husband, and I, and and of course Neil.
Everybody loves Neil, and that's kind of the connector for us.
Absolutely.
And Peggy Campolo, and we'll get back to that in just a little while. But let's just jump into your story, because I want to. Oh man, tell me kind of where you grew up, kind of what your religious background was, a little bit about that.
I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, and went to a little Assembly of God church. My mother would take me to the altar before church every Sunday and pray over me and have me stay till she prayed through, because that's the way the Assemblies of God did. And I remember her praying when I was about 5 years old, and she said, "Dear God, make little Randy your servant."
Right.
And so, of course, in my mind, I saw myself as a little boy, and I had this big silver tray with fruit and all kinds of delectable desserts. And I was walking in these huge doors that opened up, and then, of course, you know, we always see God kind of like Zeus when you're a child.
Yeah.
And so there was this older man sitting on this throne, and I was there serving him.
Right.
That was my concept of what my mother had said. But ever since she prayed over me, there was a desire birthed in my heart that I didn't want to do anything else in life but be a minister.
Right.
And to get to know God more. I had this insatiable desire to know God.
See, I love that. I didn't come to that until my teenage years, but you actually, it was in you from your earliest childhood.
Absolutely. And you know, when you went to the Assemblies of God in the small town like I did, they were Pentecostal. And so they didn't really like for you to get involved in sports at school, because it might take you away from the revival services, you know. So our life revolved around the church.
Y'all would have 2 and 3 week revivals?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we were Baptists. We didn't do that. When I came into the deal, we were just doing 3 and 4 day things.
Well, you know, a lot of times the evangelist didn't have anywhere else to go, so he'd say the Lord spoke to him, wanted to stay another week.
That's a good one. That's good. So you grew up in church and you love it, and it's your life. You love God, and at some point you have this realization that you might be gay.
Well, and I had really felt like I had gotten the call.
Right.
You know, everybody had called me but God, and I didn't know if I was going to get a phone call or what.
Yeah, how does this work?
But in the 11th grade, I went to a youth retreat, and I sensed very strongly that God was saying to me, "When are you going to stop saying no to my call in your life?" And I said, "Why?" You know, I don't want to say no. I want to do it, but I don't want to embarrass me and my family and everybody if it's not you.
Right.
And so the answer came to me. The knowing will come in the accepting.
Right.
And so I said, "Yes, Lord, you know that's my heart. That's what I've always wanted to do." And so I went to Evangel College in Springfield, Missouri.
I have a friend that went to Evangel. I hear it's a good school. Really
well, it is, and it's a liberal arts, although I think they took the liberal out of the title now, but that's a whole nother story. But then I transferred after a semester, and went to Southwestern Assemblies of God Bible College in Waxahachie, Texas. And so while I was there, I knew something was going on in my mind and in my heart, and it was that I was gay. But I could not admit that to myself. I was internalizing homophobia because of what the church had told me. But my natural desires were to be romantically drawn to a man instead of a woman.
I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah, and so when I was at Evangel, I had met my now husband, Gary Eddy, and he was from South Dakota, and he was friends with, I was friends with his roommate. That's how we met. And I was very despondent when I was at Evangel. I wasn't ready. They didn't prepare kids for college the way they do now. And so I was despondent, and Gary would listen to me talk. And I just, I was drawn to him, but I would not admit that it had anything to do with an attraction other than we were just good buds,
Right,
you know.
right.
And so when I left at the end of the semester, I got a love letter from Gary. And he said, you know, when you would come in my room and after you left, I would have these fantasies where we were on a desert island together and nobody to judge us, and
Right.
we were in love with each other. And I had a scene from Here to Eternity and the Waves,
Right,
you know,
right.
is what he was imagining. And, you know, when I first read it,
Had to scare you a little,
well, no, first it was, whoa,
right?
because I was beginning to connect with my true sexuality.
Right.
And I was thinking, ooh, but then immediately that, no, you cannot possibly even think this. So that's the response he got from me.
Oh, really?
Oh, you can't think of us this way. This is wrong. This
Right.
is, you know, and so for 2 weeks he didn't respond. And this was in 1974. And so when he did respond, he said, at first I was angry, but I'm Assembly of God too. I know where you're coming from. And I struggle with the same thing, but I know that I'm gay. I know that. And so I thought, well, okay, but I can't do that. I cannot accept that because it would mean to me, because the way I felt, if you were gay, you couldn't be Christian.
Right.
And if you're Christian, you couldn't be gay.
Right.
So I was split down the middle.
Right.
And so I had this insatiable desire to know God. And so I thought, well, if I can, you know, say no to these desires, and I had read a book somewhere that said all boys kind of go through this experimental stage with other boys. And so, and some of my friends did, but they grew out of it and I didn't,
Right.
you know? And so I was just thinking, what is going on? So Gary and I remained friends, but we, you know how long distance friendships are, and he was in South Dakota and I was in Arkansas. So, I mean, there was just this, I wanted to know him, but there was just no way to know him that far away. So we kind of lost touch.
And you kind of poured your life into ministry, I guess?
I did for a while, but I mean, you can't continue to say no to your sexuality because it will get your attention.
Right.
And it was getting my attention, but it was not in a positive way because there were no gay role models. There was no one that I saw that was in the church that said, I'm gay and I'm proud. I know God created me this way. There was no Ellen coming out on television.
Right.
There was no, I mean, every song was about heterosexual love. Every love song, every love poem was about heterosexuals. And movies and plays, everything was heterosexual. And so I just thought, I've got to get over this. I've got to somehow ask God to deliver me. And so I tried that, but then finally, I didn't find anyone in the church that would help me.
Right.
And so I thought, well, you know, if that's all it is, I'm going to go find some gay people because at least they won't judge me.
Right.
The church is judging me. Even if I hadn't come out to them, I knew what they would say if I did. And that's the secret that a gay person in church tries to hide.
I think about you at college, and I think, who could you have talked to? You would have been kicked out in a minute.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's a story where there was a guy in school that at Southwestern that it came out that he was gay, and he kind of made a pass at another guy in our traveling group I was in. And so he wanted me to go to the dean of students and get him kicked out of the group. And so I put on my self-righteous robes and I went with him and I said, you better do something about this, Dean. You know, we can't have this getting out. And I was attacking him, and all the time inside I was going, but that's me.
Right. I get
And but I felt pressured. I had to do it.
I get it. Yeah.
And to stay under the radar. And so finally I'd had all I could take of that.
So you kind of get into the gay subculture, and but it's kind of closeted. It's kind of
Oh, yeah.
underground.
And I'll tell you what happened. First, I went to work at a dinner playhouse. I was an actor.
Yeah.
And so there, it was okay to be gay. They didn't care. The other actors let you talk about your attractions and what you were doing on the weekends, and they didn't judge you. So I had the theater world, and that was really an oasis for me.
I bet.
And then the bar scene became, for so many gay men, and I'm sure lesbian women at that time, it became their church.
Right.
It became their family.
Right.
And so I was at the bar so many nights, just.
I'm just thinking about how we have judged people for what we call that lifestyle, and yet when I think about it, where else could you go? Where else could you be? It makes so much sense now.
Well, there was nothing else available, and or going out to the parks and
Right.
Meeting somebody, or because you couldn't. Society told you way back that you were a criminal, that the medical field said you were sick.
Right.
The church said you're an abomination to God. Can you imagine where your self-esteem is?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there's nowhere that you can get, and if you're black and you're going through discrimination and racism, you can go home and your mama says, but you're black and we love you here.
Right.
And the black church would say, you're black and God loves us and black is beautiful. I didn't have that. I didn't have my family. I didn't have my church. So I went and found other gay people and I, experimented trying to find out who I am. There were no books to read other than the ones that told you the bad stuff.
Right.
And so I struggled with that for quite a while. When you hate yourself, you tend to choose people to be a part of your life that will punish you.
Right.
And I got into a very bad relationship.
Right.
It was a very mentally abusive relationship, codependent. And I was with this gentleman for about 2.5, 3 years. During that time, I came across my husband's mother's address in South Dakota. And I thought, well, I think I'll write Gary and just let him know I've come out, but I can't say it because his mother might read it.
Right.
So I would always write the letter and say, there's something very interesting that has happened in my life that I think you would be very interested in knowing. Please contact me. And this is my address. Well, I sent it, no response. So about 6 months later, I find it again. I send it, no response. So one day I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to send it one more time. And if there's no response, either she's getting them and keeping them from him, or she's moved and they're going in a dead letter file. I didn't know. So I said, I'm going to do it one more time. And if there's no answer, that's it. So I sent the letter. In the meantime, I had no idea. Gary had tried to not be gay anymore and had married a woman. And they had been married for 5 years. It was not working out. I mean, they were friends, but it just wasn't what his interest was. And so they got a divorce after 5 years. He let her live in their house until she could find someplace, and he went and lived with his mom. And the day he moved in with his mom, that last letter I sent arrived.
Some kind of synchronicity.
Yeah, I love synchronicity.
Yeah.
And boy, when I look back at my life, when I thought nobody was there for me, God was in everything. I mean, I see it. Even the parts where people would say I should be ashamed, I'm not ashamed of it.
Right.
Because I was finding my way.
Right.
And so Gary responded, came to visit me. Well, my partner at the time was very jealous and it was not, but Gary was able to see how he would put me down in front of my friends, and he treated me the way he did. And Gary kept saying to me when we had a moment together, he'd say, Randy, you're a good person. You deserve better than this. You're just gonna die if you keep going through this. No one should have to go through this. And I listened. But I was very committed because I thought, once you commit to somebody, you stick it out. And I was trying so hard to do that. But when Gary left, I decided I was going to leave my partner. And so I told Gary, I'm going to do it. When I did, he said he was suicidal. How can you do this to me? And there was that pull, that codependency to, if I just stay, I can make it okay for him. Right. But it wouldn't be okay for me.
Right.
And so I finally said, no, I'm leaving. Gary immediately wrote to me and said, I'd like to come to Arkansas and be with you. And at first I said, okay. But then I started thinking, I'm still codependent. I don't know if I can do this or not.
Right.
And it wouldn't be right for Gary to leave everything there in South Dakota, his job and everything, and move here where he doesn't know anybody but me if I'm not ready for a relationship. So I sent him a message and a letter and said, don't come. And so he said I broke his heart the second time.
I know. You were tough.
Why did he hang in there, though?
He is a good
He's
man.
a saint.
He is a saint. He is a saint.
And so...
and I hear one of the funniest people. I hear he is hilarious.
Oh, he is.
That's what they tell me.
He does stand-up comedy every
That's what
Sunday
I
at
hear.
our church now. But, we stayed friends. I ended up going back. I wasn't strong enough. I went back for one more year of hell. And at the end of that year, I thought, if this is what being gay is, I don't want to be gay.
Right.
And if there's any way I can be ex-gay, I'm going to do it.
So you actually attempted again to pray it away?
Well, this was the time. At this time, I was admitting it. The first time, I didn't admit it.
Okay.
Because I had all that internalized homophobia. This time, I admitted it.
Right.
I said, I'm gay, but I don't want to be gay. And I want to be ex-gay, so I contacted Love in Action and all the ex-gay ministries. I didn't ever live in, but I got all the information. They sent me their cassette tapes back then, and their books and their letters, and I'd listen to them and I would think, okay, now that's a stretch.
Yeah.
The way they would try to explain why we were afraid of women and all this, which I'm not afraid of women.
So you knew it just wasn't.
I gave it the good college try. I really did. And Gary at the same time was going to a Wesleyan church. So he came out to his pastor and they started doing sessions together to try to be ex-gay. And so we were doing this and kind of comparing notes. And when he would kind of have a bad day, he'd say, well, I fell off the wagon today, or, and inside of me, I was a little jealous.
Right.
But I'm not gay.
Right.
But, why am I jealous? And so then I decided I would start dating a woman. And I started dating this really nice woman. She could sing and play the piano, and for a pastor or minister that wants to be, and so we started dating. But when we were together, it was like, she always wanted to hold my hand, and she'd say, tickle my arm. And I just go, I don't want to touch you.
Right.
I want to be your friend and we can watch movies together. I don't want to be romantic, but I would try to play that part because I thought God's going to heal me, and at the same time, AIDS had hit really hard in Arkansas. And I had a dear friend who was dying of AIDS, and I started volunteering. Well, that led into a whole this was like 86, 87, when it was just starting to show up in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so there was no AIDS Foundation. There was nothing then, Ryan White, nothing. And so there was this crazy woman named Dolly who cussed like a sailor but had a heart bigger than Dallas.
I love your stories about that.
And her son had AIDS. And when I started helping with him, she said, you're going to be my preacher in my back pocket, because we're going to go down the hallways of the hospital and find those little red cards that are on the door. And we know that's an AIDS patient, because they couldn't tell us.
Right.
And so we would go in, and if they needed to be fed, we'd feed them. If they needed to be bathed, we'd bathe them.
You're doing the real life ministry. Oh, my God.
And so my mother, she was upset because she was all sided that I was not going to be gay anymore, because they were very much in the Assemblies of God. And when I came out to them, it was not pretty. I mean, it was horrible. And my mother said, you're going to kill your dad. Oh, boy, thanks, Mom.
Yeah.
The guilt, the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
And so she said, Randy, when missionaries went to the leper colonies, they contracted leprosy. You could get AIDS. And I said, Mom, I have such a call and a desire in my heart to minister. You think with my past, any church is going to let me in their pulpit? And of course, I was calling it my past.
Right.
They're going to want to see my credentials, and they won't give me credentials. And I said, but when I walk in the room of an AIDS patient that is dying, even the nurses and the chaplains would pray for him out in the hall. And I said, they don't ask to see my credentials.
No.
They just want me to hold their hand. And I'd take off the gloves and I'd hold their hands, I'd hug them, and it was like they were trying to get life from me. And so I saw like 70-something of my friends die in a very short period of time.
I can't even imagine.
In my early 30s. As you get older, life kind of prepares you to lose a lot of your friends, but
not at that age.
And I had not been tested, and so there was that thing, do I really want to know? Because I knew that I had done everything they had done, and we didn't know to protect ourselves because we didn't know the AIDS was even there. And so I finally went and got tested. Back then you had to wait 3 weeks. And I mean, it was like I had an elephant on my chest. I couldn't breathe for 3 weeks. And then when I finally got my results and they were negative, and the lady that gave me my results helped me. I was volunteering with AIDS, and she was too, and she knew me, and she said, I don't guess I have to tell you how not to get this. I said, no. I feel like I've just swam through the mouth of a shark, And so I started dating this woman, and she and I started traveling, singing together, and people would kind of start opening up to me in ministry again.
Oh, I bet. And I'm thinking if you could have made that work, you would have made that work.
Yes.
If there was any way.
Yes. Of course, I was still kind of a stepchild.
Right.
And my pastor at the Assembly of God Church said, you don't have to tell people about your background. And I thought, well, okay, if we're just saying this is a sin and God's going to deliver me from this sin, if it's drugs, you want me to get up and tell how God delivered me from drugs.
Right.
But don't tell this. No,
Right.
shh,
Right.
don't tell this. And then when someone would receive Christ in the hospital because they were concerned about their, dying, and they'd say, I want to pray. And so I'd pray with them, and I'd ask my pastor, I said, can they be baptized if they are well enough to get out of the hospital? Oh, I don't have any problem with that. You can baptize them. It was always that. It was kind of like Randy's crazy, followers. And so I was just started getting disenchanted with that. Then, and finally, on a Valentine's Day that will go down in history as the Valentine's Day Massacre,
Right.
when I was pressured into being in a romantic relationship with this woman I was dating, and I felt so much pressure and I broke. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a Christian and knew I was trying to be ex-gay, and she said, Randy, if you were to marry this woman, would you be able to, if she went and bought a lingerie and met you at the door after work, and would she be a turn on to you?
Right.
And I said, well, probably not, but I would be faithful and I'd be a good husband. And
Right.
She said, Randy, I wouldn't want a husband I couldn't seduce.
Right.
And that hit something in me. So I broke up with the wife. I said, you deserve someone that can appreciate you for your femininity. And I'm not there. I can't do it. And so now I'm just really thinking, what am I going to do? And Gary said he was relieved when I broke up, because I told him, we're going to get married. He said, and I said, and you'll get married. We're ex-gay. You'll get married, and our families will get together, and we'll be friends. And Gary's thinking in the back, he would go, yeah. In the back, no, because he had not given up on us being together.
Right.
And so about this time, I was getting very disenchanted with the Assembly of God Church I was attending. It was a large church, and I was doing their theater productions, and they would pay me under the table because I was a stepchild. And so they got a call, the minister of music, from a Cumberland Presbyterian church that was just starting out in Sherwood and North Little Rock. And he said, the pastor said to our music minister at First Assembly, we want that kind of music. We want that praise and worship kind of music. Cumberlands have hymns, but they don't have that praise and worship stuff that the Assemblies of God have. Do you have anybody that could help us out? So he said, well, yeah, we've got a young man that, I think he would be good for that, because I played the piano and I could lead singing, and I was cheap.
Yeah.
So we started out in a YMCA, and the pastor, I was up front with him. I said, this is who I am. I'm not acting on being gay, but I've tried for 4.5 years to not be gay, and I still, my attractions haven't changed, but I'm not acting on it. And he said, well, I don't understand that. And he was my age. We were the same age, and he was very dynamic. And he said, but you know what? I know you, and I know God's hand is upon you for ministry. So I'm with you, and I will go through this with you. However God leads you through this, I'll be by your side, be your pastor, you know. And so I thought, wow. But he said, I wouldn't tell everybody in the church. Just kind of, and let them kind of get to love you first. Then when they find out, maybe that'll make a difference. So I thought, okay. So I got, and then Gary, we stayed in touch. And so I wrote him a letter and I said, you know, I'm beginning to think, because I thought, why would God put romance in my heart and tell me I have to be celibate for the rest of my life? Yeah. Why would he do that? Why would God do that? And so I was telling Gary this. I said, you know, I'm beginning to think that God doesn't have a problem. I'm the one that has a problem with this. Yeah. And so he immediately wrote back and said, if you decide that you can have a significant other, I want to be the first in line. And I thought, oh, I don't know if that far yet. Right. You know? So in 92, he had been a caregiver for his mom. In February of 92, she passed. So he came to visit in May of 92 in Little Rock. And we went camping, which he hated. And then we went to Eureka Springs, this gorgeous little town in the Ozarks that is very progressive in the midst of white supremacists. And we had the most wonderful vacation. And we went and saw, they have this huge outdoor passion play of the life of Christ. And we went to see it. And I was sitting there, and I knew I was falling in love with this guy, or maybe had already years ago fallen in love with him. And I was feeling those emotions, romantic emotions. And I was sitting here watching the life of Christ. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me that my spirituality and my sexuality were coming together, and I was whole.
That's beautiful.
I was whole for the first time in my life.
That is so beautiful.
And so Gary said after the play, he said, you know, Randy, I really want to move to Arkansas. I want us to get married. Well, of course, you couldn't get married then, but I want us to be together. And I said, well, you're scaring the hell out of me. You really are. Because I had gotten back into ministry, and I thought, what is this going to do?
Yeah.
So, you know.
Nobody can imagine what you are having to go through. I guess all gay people are having to go through back then, trying to figure out how to navigate, especially as a pastor.
Yes. And so, at first I thought, oh, I don't know. I couldn't wait to get him on the plane to go home. And then the next minute on the drive home, I'm missing him. So I think about it. Where are you going to find somebody that's gay, that loves God, comes from the same spiritual background as you do? You know he's honest to a fault, and he's attracted to you. He loves you. Where are you going to find the building blocks for a relationship like that? Yeah. So I called him and I said, I want to take you up on that. So we had to wait till September for him to get through with his job to move to Arkansas. And when he walked into, I'd gotten us an apartment. And when he walked into our apartment, I can't explain the emotion that came over me.
I bet.
And we hugged, because we hadn't been able to even touch for 5 months. And we hugged, and it was like we waddled over to the couch to sit down together. Right. I didn't want to let him go. Right. And this tremendous love came over us. And we were bound together in 92 and had known each other since 74. And it's a love story that is an epic.
Oh, it is. It is.
What we went through to get, but we weren't ready back then. We had to go through all this. This is what I've learned about spirituality, is it was all important. Everything, the things I would have thought were mistakes, were all part of me getting to know myself and getting to understand these desires. And so I don't regret any of that, you know, and that was a victory for me to get to that point, to really say, I don't regret anything that I did to find myself.
And let me ask you this. So you're at this Presbyterian church, this startup church. Gary comes into the scene. I guess you have friends that know in the community.
Yes.
And your ministry kind of flourishes there.
And there are some people that attend that are gay. But
so you're not broadcasting it, but...
No. But the people had to know.
They had to know.
Because if they, like when we moved into a new place after a year, one of the ladies in the church said, well, have you and Gary gotten your color scheme together yet? Because I want to get you something for your kitchen. You don't ask two straight guys that.
Right, right.
You know, I mean, they
Yeah.
had to at some level know, but as long as they didn't know it officially, they didn't have to
Don't
deal
ask,
with
don't
that
tell,
whole
we
issue.
won't talk about it, right.
And I was still trying to go along with the pastor. And so when people would, and we had rings, you know,
Right.
we had a ceremony in 93
I
after we'd
remember
been
at first
together.
the rings didn't even match because you just didn't want to call attention to it. I remember you saying that.
And so people would say, are you married? I said, I don't have a wife. I didn't lie. Then they would say, well, I saw your ring. Oh, it's a cross ring. Isn't that pretty?
Yeah.
You know, and I thought, and we had a Bible study in our home from the church every week. And I had to go straighten up, take down all of our romantic pictures of ourselves together. And finally, I got to the point where I thought, I can't do this anymore.
So you decide you're not gonna be hidden anymore, and the church then says you can't be on staff. Is that how that happened?
Well, actually, what happened was, and you know, I'm going through a whole thing with my parents too, because they're trying to understand. And so I was no longer invited. Well, I was invited to Christmas, and we lived 2 miles from them. I was invited, but Gary wasn't. And so I talked to a lesbian minister friend of mine, and I said, what am I going to do? We've always been a close-knit family. We always spent the holidays together. And she said, Randy, if you do not show your parents that you respect your relationship, how can you ever expect them
Great wisdom.
to respect your relationship? And then I heard a quote, I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I am not. It was one of those aha moments. As Oprah would say, that's tweetable.
Right.
You know, I mean, whoa. And I thought, I can't do this anymore because closets are so confining.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to celebrate. I didn't ever want to be ashamed of the love that God had placed in my heart for this man. And I was proud of our relationship. So I told the pastor, I said, I can't do it anymore. And so he said, well, how do you want to handle it? I said, I'm going to write a letter to the elders telling them why I do not believe my loving, committed, Christ-centered relationship with Gary disqualifies me from ministry and how much I love the church, but I want them to know. And so he said, okay. And he said, I'll be there when you read the letter to them. And so Gary joined me and I read the letter. Well, there was like 5 elders. And so they started immediately going, well, now, wait a minute. This is not biblical. And one of the elders, a lady said, well, you know, I'm divorced and remarried. I mean, if we're going to say biblical.
Yeah.
And then we had one elder who was very elderly, but he loved us. And he said, these boys, think about all they've done. We have a beautiful prayer garden that tells the whole life of Christ behind the church. That was Randy's dream. He loves God. What are we going to do? Just throw him out? And so they decided they would think about it for a week and then come back. And during that week, not to tell anybody, well, you know how that goes.
Oh, yeah.
And so I get a call from Mike, the pastor, and he says, I've heard from the Board of Missions, because we were still a mission church. They were weaning us off, but they had started it from scratch on the Cadillac plan. They paid the pastor. They provided a place for you to meet. And so we were, you know, the head of the Board of Missions said he wanted to meet with me. So Mike and I went to the headquarters in Memphis, Tennessee. We met with the head of the Board of Missions, and he said, you know, I have to tell you that I have someone in my family that's gay. And I have done a lot of searching, and I realize there is a place for gay people in the family of God. But this church is so young, this would destroy it. So I'm going to ask you to prayerfully resign and not put the church through this. And I said to him, I said, you know what? My coming out to the church is not an act of violence. It is an act of vulnerability. And he said, well, at least think about it. So, you know, we got in the car to come back to Arkansas, about a 2-hour drive. And I just thought, and I said, Mike, what are we going to do? You know, and he says, well, we'll see how the elders meeting goes. And so he still was kind of there with me. And I thought he was going to support me because he had said, you know, I'll go with you and we'll do this and we'll do that and see where we can get this. And So then the Saturday night before the next Sunday, something changed in him. And we were at the church, and he had just shut down.
So he had already decided he needed to do what he was going to do.
Because he and I were like this. I mean, we worked together like hand in glove. And I loved being his associate. And I loved his spirit. You couldn't help but love him. And so I said, Mike, what's wrong? I mean, what are we going to do? I don't know. And I thought, they've gotten to him. And I went home and cried and cried and cried. And came the next morning to church and led music. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. Because I love these people. And so they were having the meeting the next Wednesday night, the elders meeting, to decide what to do. Well, the head of the Board of Missions came, and he wanted to meet with me a couple hours before so he could try to persuade me to go ahead and resign. And so he said, what have you decided? I said, I just can't. I can't. I cannot ethically resign because I do not believe that my loving, committed, Christ-centered relationship with Gary disqualifies me from ministry.
Right.
And you got to do whatever you're going to do, but I can't. I appreciate
your strength.
I cannot ethically resign. I'm not going to make this easy for you,
right,
because it's been hell for me.
Right.
And so then he just shut down on me. And I said, you want to go out and see our prayer garden back? No, he couldn't show any kind of approval of me, and that was so painful. So we get into the meeting, and the pastor's wife comes, and she wasn't even supposed to be there because she's worried that Mike's going to lose his job. And she keeps saying to me over and over, Randy, if Mike and I knew that anything we did would hurt this church, we would resign. Why won't you resign? And I'd just say, I cannot ethically resign. And I would just answer very matter-of-factly. And then the oldest elder says, are we saying these boys are wicked? Is that what we're saying? Well, these boys are wicked? I helped him with that prayer garden out there. You can feel the Spirit of God out there. They're not wicked. And so finally I just said, well, I just want to say something. And I said, I've shared with you in my letter how much this church means to me. I've been with y'all on the saddest days and the most glorious days. And I've shared them with you. And I would go to the mat with any one of you. But from what I'm hearing today, I don't think the majority of you are going to do that for me. And I want you to know that there is a special blessing that is available for a church that will open their doors to everybody. Amen. Not just the 99, but everybody.
Amen.
And I said, and you have touted yourself as this new church development where if you're a misfit in any other church, you're welcome here.
Yeah.
And I said, and it doesn't have to be the gay issue in somebody's life, but there are people here that they hadn't grown up in church. They really are excited about this church. And they're going to see if you fire me and we have to leave, they're going to say, okay, they found something in Randy they could not love. So how long before they find something in me? Yeah. And that special anointing and blessing will be gone. And I said, we have been hurt. Those of us who are here who are gay have been hurt by the churches. And we thought we had found a safe haven here. But I'm telling you, God will provide a place, and it will hurt us deeply. But God will provide a place for us. But you will have lost the beautiful spirit that is in this church. And so I said, and then they started going back and forth. I said, we've heard enough. And this is when the Board of Missions said, I know Randy's ministry. He did the praise and worship for our National Evangelism Conference. I know God's Spirit is upon him. And I'm convicted in asking you to do this. But I must ask you to terminate Randy's position.
And so they terminated you. And is this the night that you get bit by the recluse spider?
Yes, I went home. And this is, I don't know how much time we got, but this was something that happened that night. The pastor and his wife came by to let us know that we had been fired. They gave me a 2-month severance pay. Of course, I worked full-time for part-time salary, and I had no insurance. And so he said, well, surely you could feel the love for you around that table. I said, sorry, I do not feel the love. I did not feel the love. I said, and he says, well, well, maybe now we can take vacations together because we don't have to both be there. And I said, I looked at him like he had three heads.
I bet.
And he said, well, I don't know what else to say. And my husband Gary said, say goodnight, Gracie.
Yeah.
He was done. And he says, well, could we just pray? And I said, sure. So he wanted to hold hands, and his wife was standing off to the side and said, now Marilyn loves you. She just doesn't understand this, but she loves you. And so I reached over and took her hand, and we prayed. And he said in that prayer, God, how it must break your heart when we do what is not right.
So he knew.
But that was the last time he said that. Then he went into, save the church mode.
Right.
And so he went and visited every home because they were going to tell the church. And so that night I went to bed. I remember dreaming I'd been stung on my back. And when I woke up, there was this big red place on my shoulder blade. And then I looked in the bed and there was a dead brown recluse spider. So by the afternoon, I started getting a fever and breaking out in a really bad rash. We had no insurance. So here we go to the emergency room. And they ask you all those questions. What is your church affiliation?
Tears.
What is your occupation?
Tears, yeah.
What is your marital status?
Tears.
Because they wouldn't accept that you were partnered, even though it wasn't legal yet. And so I was just devastated. And of course, in my mind, I immediately thought, what would Jerry Falwell do with this?
That's right.
You came out to your church and then you go home to your marriage bed and look what happened. Don't you think God's trying to tell you something?
Yeah.
Oh, that old God came real strong.
Right.
And so I had made friends with Peggy Campolo, wife of Tony Campolo. And she knew I was going through this. And she had been keeping up with me by phone. This was before cell phones and all of that. And she and Tony were vacationing in P-Town, Provincetown, which is kind of a gay mecca.
It is.
And she said, I'm sending you this gift. She said, I know, Tony said, I probably shouldn't do it. I said, he's got a great sense of humor. It was a brown recluse spider lapel pin. I'd never seen one before, hadn't seen one since.
But she saw it in P-Town and bought it.
And she said, I want you to look at that. And it looked real. And realize that something very small affected something much larger than itself for evil. And what you and Gary have done by coming out to your congregation may seem like a small thing, but it's going to affect something much larger than yourself for good.
Amazing. Amazing.
And she was like my epistle from Paul, because I didn't have any connections with any evangelicals. And Tony had, I met her by writing Tony, and he put me in touch with his wife. But Tony had told me, if they come after you, they got to come through me first.
See, that's amazing. Now, I know we've got to wrap this up. Yeah. You, in the aftermath, Peggy encourages you to...
She says, if I was there that Sunday when they announced that you're fired, I would come up to you and say, where are we meeting for church next Sunday? Because I believe that you have the gifts for pastoring. And if your gifts aren't being used in the Little Rock area and there's no place there, there's got to be all kinds of people that need a place to worship. And so I think you should start. Well, that's the last thing I wanted to hear at that point. But 6 months later, January of 1996, we started Open Door Community Church in our home, Gary and me and a straight woman. And from the very beginning, what God shared with me, I'm not asking you to start a gay church. There shouldn't have to be a gay church. What I'm asking you to do is to start a grace church where everybody's welcome at the table, to take communion together, and that's where the healing takes place. Because not only do you need to be healed, they need to be healed of their homophobia, of their wrong teaching. And when you come together, that's where the healing is going to take place. So from the very beginning, if somebody said gay church, I'd say, no, we're a grace church. Gays are welcome, straights are welcome, all races are welcome. We are open to everybody. And that was in January 96.
Well, let me tell you this. In about 2005, I ended up in a car with Tony and Peggy Campolo, and I had progressed and realized that LGBTQ, we had treated people so poorly, and I knew the church needed to be inclusive, and we were making big steps in that direction. And she starts telling me your story. And I had never, like, the thought that a gay person, it's like I thought I was really far down the road, but I didn't realize. She said, well, let me tell you this. And she starts telling me your story, and she says you're the finest pastor that she knows, and she tells me about you and Gary's relationship, and she talks about your hospitality, and she talks about this Grace Church and these walls that I had around me, that this box I didn't know, suddenly they exploded. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize how huge this was to really understand God's grace and how we're all the same. So I've been wanting to meet you. And then we fast forward another, I don't know, 8 or 10, 12, 14 years. And I meet Neil Campbell and find out he is in your church. And then he begins telling me about how amazing it is, that it is one of the most wonderful, grace-filled places on the planet.
He calls it the International House of Hugs.
International House of Hugs. And so when I got to meet you a few years ago, it was one of the highlights of my life because I had idolized you. And I don't know if there were that many gay pastors in evangelical southern places. I just always looked to you as like one of the first, right? Because you weren't in a liberal Episcopal kind of a setting.
We were emotional about our worship.
You were emotional about worship. It had an evangelical feel to it, and you were doing it. And
but it was a whole different God.
Yeah, different God.
It was a God that accepts everybody
from day one.
That loves everybody and is not out to send the whole world to hell.
I love that.
But the whole world is to be saved. And I found that God. And if it took all of that rejection to find that God, I feel so free today. And I'm 63 years old now. And I've seen people walk through that door. Stan Mitchell, when he was trying to figure out how he felt about this issue.
Changed his life.
We became good friends.
I love hearing how you guys have connected for so long.
Yeah.
Back before anybody
2004.
Even knew. Yeah, way back when.
Yeah. And, and Peggy, of course.
And you became Tammy Faye from PTL. You kind of became her pastor, didn't you?
Well, no, her son's pastor.
Her son, okay.
Jay. He calls Gary and me his two gay dads.
Right.
And we became very close because Jay was struggling how to respond to, he was supposed to speak at an Exodus conference.
Wow.
And I invited him to come speak at our church. And he ended up, they canceled when they found out he was at our church, but he made them pay. But yeah, and Jay.
So that's how you did her funeral.
Yes, when she passed, he said, "I can't do it." She wanted me to do it. Can you get to Kansas City? I said, "I can do it."
That's amazing.
And I would always loved her because she would always say, "God loves you, just the way you are. He really does." And I mean, I was suicidal some nights. I mean, I never got to the point where I followed any, plans. But I would be sitting there at night thinking nobody loves me, and she would look in the camera and say, "God loves you just the way you are. He really does," with those big crocodile tears. And to be able to do her funeral was amazing. I mean, I've seen so many things. Brian McLaren, he came and right after being at our church, he finds out that he has a son that's gay. And he was so glad that he had already publicly made that stand.
That's why I see you as one of the most influential. When I look at who has come through your doors, you're not large in numbers, it's not a mega church, but it's an influential church that has touched the world. And it's you and Gary and your love for your people, your love for everybody. I'm telling you, I'm so proud to say you're my friend.
Oh, thank you,
I want to ask you to look into that camera, and I just want you to spend just a minute or two to maybe somebody that hasn't accepted who they are, maybe, and they're wondering if it's really real. Would you just say kind of a closing word for them, and maybe even a prayer, and that'll be how we'll end this? Would that be okay?
If you are struggling with being LGBTQ, I want you to know you're not alone. And I know there's a lot of more resources today than there were when I first came out. But if you're in certain situations and surrounded by very conservative-minded people on this issue, you could feel alone right now. And you might have been bullied, and people tell you that God hates you. But I know for a fact that I have never been happier in my life since I came out and really accepted God's love for me, because I truly believe when we are born, we know we are loved. Every LGBTQ person knows they're loved in their true self. And it's the world that has caused us to be blinded to that. But I want you to, I'm kind of a mystic. I pray that the Holy Spirit will let you see in my eyes and in my heart the love of God for you. Because you're not alone, and you're special, and you're beautiful, just the way you are. And I'll say what Tammy always said, God loves you just the way you are. God really does. And so please find people that can be your family of choice. If you don't have a family that accepts you, there are people that want to love you. There are dads and moms. I believe that's the purpose of the church, is to be a place where everybody has a daddy, everybody has a mama, everybody has a brother and a sister, a grandma and an aunt and an uncle, a cousin, because we are the family of God, regardless of race, religion, whatever. You are loved. And if you would just let me say a prayer with you right now. Gracious God, we sense your presence here today. And whoever is listening to this that feels alone, I pray that supernaturally you'll allow just a peace to come into that closet and open the door and let air come in and let them breathe freely, maybe for the first time in many, many years. But let them be awakened to what they actually knew when they were born into this world, because we're all created in your image. And let them be awakened to that and realize there is a plan, there is a purpose, and that even in suffering, we are able to see even you, Jesus Christ, suffered and died because you loved the wrong people, according to the religious people of your day. So God, we just pray that hope will start a candle. I remember in my life, God, when I was fired and everything seemed so dark, I just kept hearing this little faint whisper, trust me, trust me, trust me. Let that person that is listening to my words right now, let them hear that whisper. It may not be really loud right now, but let it be soft as the voice of an angel, whispering hope to that person right now. You're precious. You're beloved of God. And God's so proud of you. Just receive that love. And I love you. And I'm pulling for you. Amen.